Let's spend the next 3 videos looking at the main controls. This page contains functions pertaining to the entire patch rather than individual layers. You can get here by going to the main button and pressing the controls tab below. The middle section has individual volume control for layer A or layer B. There's an on-off switch for layers A and B as well. Finally, there are individual pan controls and access to the 2 sound source browsers for each of layer A and layer B. In the next video, we'll take a close look at the remaining features over here on the bottom and left. In this video, we're going to take a very close look at solo, legato, and glide modes. Take a listen to this piece of music, in particular the synth lead and bass. Both of these sounds make extensive use of solo, legato, and glide modes. Let's start out by soloing the synth lead. Now, let's listen to the same part, but disable the solo function. Next, we'll listen to the same part with solo on, but legato disabled. So what's going on? With solo engaged, I'll play multiple notes together for the lead patch. Solo mode ensures that any note that you play turns off any sustaining notes. You can only hear one note at a time. Here, I'll turn solo off and play chords again. With solo mode turned off, I can hear multiple notes simultaneously and can play chords. Next, listen to each note attack as I play overlapping notes. That was with legato on. Let's turn it off and play overlapping notes. With legato off, each sound has its own individual attack, regardless of overlap. Now I'll play separated notes with legato on. When played separately, notes always retain their individual attacks, regardless of legato mode. But when notes are overlapping, legato mode takes away the attack portions of those notes. The bass patch in this song is a great example of legato mode. As we'll see in later videos, the attack portions of sounds are controlled by envelope generators, modulators that control the filter cutoff and volume of a layer over time. These envelope generators remain at their sustaining levels rather than being retriggered when notes overlap in legato mode. So let's summarize. When solo mode is active, you can only hear one note at a time. No chords can play. Any note you play cuts off any previously sustaining notes. When legato is on, overlapping notes will contain no attacks, helping to create flowing phrases. But with legato off, any new note will contain an attack, regardless of other sustained notes. Now, let's turn our attention to glide mode. Here's the synth patch we've been using in this song, and I'll raise this time value slider up to make the effect obvious. Every note I play slides up to its pitch from the pitch of the previously played note. How long this glide takes is determined by the time slider. This is sometimes called portamento. With glide legato turned off, the glide occurs regardless of whether notes overlap or not. But with glide legato on, portamento occurs only when notes overlap. It can be very interesting to glide only one of 2 layers in a patch, and they can be enabled independently with these buttons. Let's lower the time value back to that subtle glide we had before. Let's summarize. Glide, otherwise known as portamento, means that the note pitch glides from the previous note's pitch to the current note's pitch. The amount of time this takes is controlled by the time value slider. When glide legato is on, the portamento effect only occurs when your notes overlap. With glide legato turned off, the portamento effect always occurs. Let's move on to other main page controls. We'll start with the voices setting. In a software synthesizer, playing multiple notes in a chord activates multiple virtual oscillators under the hood. So when I play this chord with my sequencer, with a setting of 16 allowed voices, I hear every note in the chord. So I'll set this to allow only a single voice. Now when my sequencer plays the same chord, I'll hear only a single note. Whenever the number of voices actually playing exceeds the number allowed, the oldest sustaining voices are cut off. This is called voice stealing. Here's the same effect with me manually triggering many voices from the keyboard with a setting of 1. Now let me bring in my CPU load meter. This shows me how hard the computer is working to generate all these voices. We can see that with a single voice playing, we're generating a load of about 20% on one of the 2 CPU cores. I'm going to set the number of voices to 24. Now I'm going to trigger a whole bunch of notes. We're using almost half of a CPU core to generate all those notes. But triggering a single note, even while allowing for 24 voices, the load on the CPU returns to its previous level. In other words, it's the number of notes actually sounding or sustaining that determines the load on the CPU. With certain kinds of patches and performances, you can limit the voices without noticeable voice stealing. This sometimes comes in handy on older or slower computers. I'll set that back to 16 voices. I can use the pop-up, or I can use these double arrows called steppers to incrementally change values. These are found throughout Omnisphere. Now the octave setting is pretty self-explanatory. There's the same sequence patch transposed up an octave and back down. Down below, we have a part level mixer. Now these controls for mute, solo, and level are the same as the controls within the mixer itself. The controls are duplicated in both locations for your convenience. Now when going back to your patch view, watch out for this common error. Make sure you go back to the correct patch. Okay, you'll recall that our patches can consist of 2 layers mixed together. The center section provides on-off switches for both layers, as well as volume and pan controls. I've turned off layer A. Let me turn up the volume on this exceedingly subtle string patch and play around with its pan position. Here's a useful tip. I want to reset the pan sliders to their default center position. That's Command-click on the Mac or Control-click on a PC. Here's another handy shortcut. Notice how when I move the volume slider, it moves in 1 dB increments. But if I hold the Shift key down while adjusting, I can move with much greater precision. These tips work for any slider or knob in Omnisphere. Okay, below this area we have the sound source browser area. We have a zoom or magnifying glass. Clicking on this brings up the sound source zoom window for detailed information about the samples used for this particular layer. Closing that, clicking on the name field or the folder icon brings up the sound source browser itself. This would allow you to load different samples directly from the main page. Here, separate controls determine how much pitch bend occurs with a maximum throw of the wheel either up or down. Listen to this example where the bass bends down an octave. I recorded the pitch bend wheel going all the way down, and with a setting of 12, the pitch drops an octave. But with a setting of 2, the pitch only drops a whole step. As you'd imagine, the pitch bend up settings work in the same way. An up setting of 2 results in a whole step increase, while the setting of 7 would raise the pitch a fifth. Don't forget, you can use the stepper arrows as well as the pop-up to change values in any of these boxes. Let's take a look at one final feature in this video that opens lots of interesting possibilities: alternate tunings. First, I'll load a more appropriate patch to check these out. Here's a plain vanilla C major scale. Now, I'll load a Turkish 24-tone scale and play the same notes on my MIDI controller. A 2-octave range on my keyboard creates only a single octave pitch difference. Here's a 7-tone scale derived from one of the gamelan instruments. A fifth on the keyboard produces the octave range, and the 7 tones of the scale are produced by playing chromatically. In addition to a variety of ethnic tunings, Omnisphere provides modern Western tunings, microtonal tunings, and alternate historical Western tunings. There's still a whole lot of powerful stuff we can do in the main controls page. We'll check it out next video. This is the edit page. This video is not about the edit page, but it does concern us, for it contains the envelopes that shape the volume and filter over time for all of our patches. These volume and filter shapes can be further influenced by note velocity, how hard you play the keyboard. How sensitive the envelopes are to note velocity is determined by this knob. So every layer has amplitude and filter envelopes, and these can be further modulated by note velocity. Omnisphere has a velocity sensitivity curve editor in the main page. This editor scales note velocities from your sequencer tracks or directly from your MIDI keyboard to suit your playing style or the way a particular patch responds. Let's see how it works with this bass patch. There are 4 velocity curve preset shapes that you can use as starting points. For instance, with the flat line shape, all note velocities result in the same sound. In my sequencer, I programmed a 1-measure loop where the velocities crescendo from 0 to 127, playing a pattern of 16th notes. So let's listen. Flat shape. Linear, equal rise in intensity and velocity. Concave, rapid rise in intensity. And convex, here intensity rises slowly relative to velocity. But wait, there's more. Click on the magnifying glass to open the velocity curve editor. The horizontal axis represents incoming note velocities. The vertical axis represents the velocities sent to your synth patch. Here the curve allows me to quickly create a concave shape. And here's a linear shape. The sliders adjust the range of velocities. Here we max out on our outgoing velocities while incoming velocities are still low. Whereas here the highest incoming velocities only send velocities of about 64 to the patch. That keeps the bass part very mellow. Here's a curve for a hard-to-play controller keyboard. No velocities lower than about 40 are sent to the patches. And so on through a variety of shapes that allow you to tailor your playing to the particular controller keyboard or tailor the patch to the feel you want. Adjusting these controls can result in radically different sounds from the same patch. The amp and filter envelope knobs duplicate the velocity sensitivity knobs we saw earlier in the edit page. Here I've disabled the filter envelope's response to velocity. There it is again. Now I'll add volume or amplitude sensitivity. And here's amplitude only. You can see what a huge difference these make. So remember, These knobs actually duplicate the velocity sensitivity controls found in the Edit page. And remember, the patch responds to velocities only after they've been processed by the velocity curve editor. So let's move on to the master filter. LPF stands for low pass filter and removes high frequencies. Use the top slider to adjust the cutoff frequency. Resonance causes a boost of frequencies at the cutoff point, making any movement of the cutoff more noticeable. HPF, or high pass filter, removes low frequencies. Now I allow more frequencies to pass through. Notice how the resonance boost automatically accentuated the existing dominant frequencies in the bass patch. Okay, let's reset those. Finally, we'll see that the arpeggiator, power switch, and preset pull-downs that we found in the dedicated pages are duplicated for your convenience in the main page controls. This duplication of controls is found throughout Omnisphere, and it makes it easy to access what you need from where you are. And that pretty much covers the main page controls.